You're listening to Toronto's #1 real estate podcast, powered by Watson Estates. The most successful local real estate investing starts right here, right now. Here's your host, broker, investor, and social media influencer, Bradley Watson.
Good morning, investors. Bradley here from Watson Estates. It is Monday, August 3rd, 2020. Happy Civic Day? It's a holiday here in Ontario. Civic Day, Civic Holiday as they call it. And you know us, we wanted a holiday. We couldn't think of a name, so we just thought, you know what, let's name it after the top-selling vehicle. But we're having a lot of fun here talking about our favorite topic, Toronto real estate. And as a realtor, I don't get any time off. And I'd rather be here with you guys anyways, talking about what's been going on over the weekend, because there's been quite a bit. And having only done my podcast on Saturday and not yesterday, I thought, you know what, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to go through the news as we round into this new week and talk about what you can expect to hear from some of the major outlets and what is the conversation that's happening in the Toronto real estate space right now. We are #1 in iTunes, Spotify, and Google Podcasts for Toronto real estate. Thank you, friends, and thank you, family, for joining us all the time, every single morning, as we continue to hit record numbers of downloads on iTunes, Spotify, and YouTube. We get wonderful comments, wonderful feedback, which you're going to hear a little bit today as well. And it's just been an incredible journey as COVID's been happening, talking and dialoguing, is that a word, with you guys here online. So let's talk about some of the stuff we're going to discuss. We're going to begin with what comes next for prices in the GTA, as Toronto Now, I believe, is the article of the day. Let me see who wrote this. Just Now Toronto. What's the difference? They're saying Toronto real estate market is headed for a cliff. Well, let's see. Let's see what they have to say. Why is that? And what classifies Canada as being in a housing bubble? You know me, I'm always saying, you know what? Tell me what makes us a housing bubble. Why are we in a housing bubble in Toronto? You say we are, but give me the numbers to show that. Well, guess what? I think I might have found numbers that give some indication of that, because I've left it out there and I still to this day have not heard anyone with a legitimate answer. Well, I might have stumbled upon one, and we're going to see if that bubble is still there and if it will be popped. We're going to talk a little bit about that. And am I, as a landlord, now able to evict my non-paying tenants again? We called 50-50, which we are 50% correct, because this month you are once again allowed to evict tenants. What does that look like? How is that going to roll out across our province with up to 150,000 tenants not paying rent across the province? We need to be talking about this, and we, in fact, will. But again, happy Civic Holiday to you. Merry Civic Holiday. For any of you American people out there, or like if you don't know, you might have heard, it's like kind of, it's pretty popular, but not, some people outside our country don't know that by law, actually, as a Canadian, when you get your license, you're actually required to get an old Honda as your first car. Yeah, they call it a civic duty. We're having a lot of fun, guys. Leave us a like, leave us a subscribe, make sure you're following us, and leave us some comments. If you've got any news going on, before we jump into this, I think you guys are great. And even if you're not, you know what? I've still summarized it in my own head that it's more likely than not just my grandma or my mom coming on and listening to us thousands of times a day. Thanks, guys. Really appreciate you. Let's jump into the news of the day. Toronto real estate market is headed for a cliff. Buckle your seatbelts. We're going Dukes of Hazzard out here, people. Let's see what they got to say in nowtoronto.com. Condo supplies in Toronto will help drive home prices down further. And I think it's important for me to preface this. Yes, I'm a realtor. Yes, I'm an investor. I am optimistic about the market. Okay, I want to start with that, because I think you're going to hear some of the things I'm saying and think, oh, well, Bradley thinks everything's going to hell in a handbasket. No, I don't. Okay, but I want to be involved in the news. I want to know what's happening. And yes, it might seem quite dreary. It might seem quite negative or pessimistic today. But guys, I am very optimistic about the market, and you should be too. Let's hear what they got to say. Toronto real estate prices are headed for a cliff. All right, all bets are off. Forget it. Screw it. The condo market will drag it further down, according to CMHC. The very neutral party of CMHC. Anticipated increase in the supply of condominium apartments will lead to softening prices next year, says the CMHC in an email to Now. This is a bullet point I got here. Toronto home prices hit an all-time high in June. Did you know that? And many people are telling me July will look much the same. The stats are coming out this week. Let's watch for that. But the CMHC has been warning that those prices will begin plunging in the fall. Unemployment and low immigration due to the COVID-19 pandemic are two main factors. According to the CMHC, the lack of demand for oil on a global scale is another factor. Obviously, that affects oil producing provinces. That will further exacerbate the impact of our economy. Extended mortgage deferral deadlines, which I think mortgage deferrals will continue to get pushed forward, but regardless, lower mortgage rates and government stimulus packages are all meant to soften the blow. They're trying to keep us afloat, trying to keep the bubble filled with air, as some people would say. Increase in Toronto's real estate supply. Okay, so let's listen to some of the stats they got here. According to the Canadian Bankers Association, we've talked about this, is more than 750,000 Canadians, 760,000 Canadians have opted to defer their mortgage or skip payments. And I've had listeners on our channel tell us they're just doing it for fun. Why not? I'll pay off other debts that are a little bit higher interest rate. Stop running credit cards, guys. That's about 16% among those with mortgages in bank portfolios. There will be an increase in Toronto real estate supply, they say, when you're no longer allowed to defer mortgages. Let's see. The supply will couple with inventory from a condo market fueled partly by short-term rental restrictions during the pandemic. And then they say this at CMHC, more units could also sit on the market longer as more buyers wait on the sidelines. Plus, combine that with a significant number of condo units under construction, currently 54,000 units, and they'll make their way into the resale pool and will further increase supply. So when we're talking about we're going off a cliff here in the GTA in prices, you say that's the title. But when you really dive into the market, this entire article is simply talking about condos. That's it. There's nothing more to it, guys. And they're saying condos will plunge and they'll lead the way to the rest to follow suit. Is that the case? I don't know. I think you're going to see seasonal fluctuations. Yes, I would not be surprised if you had prices come down slightly. But condos, no doubt in my mind, are going to take the brunt of the weight. The weight of that Civic. It's their civic duty to collapse for everyone else. Condo rental market. So what are some of the reasons? And guys, this should not be new. This is in a way a recap, but it's important to get it from different sources and different perspectives, and they are adding value here, which we'll get to. According to Treb, as we just talked about in our last podcast, the number of apartment rentals are down 24.8%. Meanwhile, listings are up 42%. So we see a disconnect. We see a rising supply and a decreasing demand for rentals. And they say there are two takeaways. First, that COVID clearly impacted demand for rental apartments. But second, we saw a continuation of the pattern experienced over the past year with year-over-year growth in rental listings far outstripping growth in rental transactions. It's so funny. We've been playing catch up on trying to create rental supply to deal with the tight vacancy rates we've had in our city, only to have COVID remove all demand and put us in a double whammy. You cannot win. You cannot win. Increased choice led to more negotiating powers for renters, resulting in year-over-year declines in average rents in the second quarter. But don't forget about it, guys. We have a housing challenge in Ontario and in Toronto. Specifically, the city is making moves to address long-term the long-term rental market. Okay, so here's what they're saying. We talked about this yesterday, but Sharing Lungs put an amazing comment, and I want to share it with you because I did not know this and I learned it. And so if I'm learning it, you might too. Now, one of the things we talked about yesterday was one of the things that came out of also another comment. The city council had a meeting and they said this: city council adopted a motion for the city to explore opportunities to generate longer-term affordable rental housing options through a strategy of the city leasing vacant short-term rental units currently offered through Airbnb and other rental platforms. That's all I had, and I was left to say, what do you think is going to happen? And I think, things like vacancy tax, like those kinds of things, right? Like, or applying the Airbnb. But I didn't even think or even really realize this idea that Sharing Lungs shared. Thank you for sharing lungs with us today. To answer your question on Airbnb and the government, from what I've seen proposed, they sign, listen to what they're doing. They want to sign a long-term lease agreement with the unit owner, and then the government leases it back or subleases it to tenants at a lower rate to make it affordable. That makes sense. Why wouldn't they just say that? It's like, we're going to explore it. But now that you've said it that way, that actually really clarifies the point. And I don't disregard at all what they go on to say here. I totally stand on the same page. Listen to this. It's typical government stupidity. What happens when the unit owner wants to sell? What about market rent? Will the owner be locked in at today's rate? Or can they charge the government market rent and the government keeps the renter's rate low? As a taxpayer, I don't want my dollars going to bail out these owners. Let the free market work its way on the rental market. I agree. There, it seems on the surface like such a great idea. I'm going to get a tenant as a landlord and you're going to be able to live affordably. Win-win. Who's paying for that? Somebody's paying for it. More likely than not, it's the landlord. It's going to come out of the pockets of the high net worth people. That's the way you sell it to the masses. But guys, we would need to pay for that. That's a taxpayer bill. And what are we going to do? Add it on top of our $1.3 trillion we're going to have at the end of the year? Oh, the government, they're like, our vacuum cleaner program isn't working anymore. Well, let's just put a Honda sticker on it so it sucks even more. But everything here, guys, has to do with condos. As it continues here in this article, condo sales. Homeowners can no longer use home equity lines of credit for down payment on investment properties. You might have heard about that. I'm getting a little carried away here, beating my mic up. Let me just fix things here for us. Oh, my arms. You guys don't realize I flail. I'm a flailer. But I've spoken with many banks, and I've asked them about this. Like, is it difficult for us to take money out? You can't do it on a line of credit. We can't borrow against my home in order to invest. And they're like, yeah, it's still possible. I mean, it's harder. It is harder now, but it's still possible. And these aren't just any monoline lenders. These are banks, actually, that have said that they're able to do it. So I think we can still structure these programs. You just need to get access to the right brokers, the right banks or mortgage companies. And so they talk about what's the risks or what are the things going on. They say this. So they're asking people, a person from Remax, Mireille Mansour. They say that the decline in condo demand will be felt more outside the central core. She says highly saturated areas like Yonge and Eglinton are also vulnerable. So when we're talking about it's going to happen in the main areas, when we look at condos, what we're actually seeing is there could be bigger risks outside the core because there's still a lot of demand to live in the city. And I think that will come back faster than demand to live in some of these condos in the outskirt communities, especially as everyone is kind of leaning more towards backyards and more living space. And they add it's forcing people to spend a bulk of their time indoors while trying to keep social distance. So elevators, lack of outdoor space has more condos less appealing. Now, condo sales, as you guys know, were up price-wise, 5%. We talked about that the other day. But that doesn't mean it's a good thing because we actually have increases in listings. Listings are down 21% and sales dropped, though, 50%. So we've got a disconnect there. The number of sales is dropping faster. We've got sales increasing, in other words. So listings increasing, in other words. So we got to be careful. We have to be careful. And the city council has approved a plan to create more housing opportunities in Toronto. And that's what we talked about. But also this missing middle. I can't talk. I'm getting a little excited here, getting wound up. This missing middle, right? The in-between, between the detached and semis and the condos. What do we call that? Like townhomes? Right? That's what they described it. But really this missing middle, these coach houses or whatever that looks like. They can live in their car. Toronto real estate right now. So where are we at? Guys, I'm just going to jump to the highlights here because I think you get the point. In the 905, especially in the below 700,000 price range, it's still on fire. They say that they're actually looking at some of the areas down by the beaches, which I can't find that point now. Yeah, Beach and Leslieville. The condos, the low-rise stuff, the lofts, the boutique styles, there's still demand in there. So it's not all condos treated equally. Both realtors, they say in this article, are cautious of the impending downturn. However, they wonder if Toronto real estate market can weather it better than expected. For now, they're telling sellers to be safe and act now before we reach that cliff. So we go in this entire article talking about the risks associated with specifically the condo segment, and then there's risks that there's a downturn, and therefore buy now before we reach that cliff. I don't get it. Why are we buying right before it comes down? Like, am I the only, these are realtors. Am I the only lone young Honda out here saying to these old BMWs, okay, Beamers. Oh my goodness. I don't know, man. Make your own investments. You guys strategize here. There's going to be opportunities coming in the coming months, but why are we running into condo space when everyone else is running out? I mean, obviously there's going to be price discounts. Let's map those out in our minds. Be ready to pull the trigger if that's the avenue you want to go with your investment portfolio. But before you go out and buy any unit, there's this idea of this housing bubble. I don't stand by this housing bubble idea, by the way. I don't think we're in a housing bubble. But I've asked a lot of people, I've asked the question, This is why I'm going to lead to my own demise around here, right? Because here I am saying, no bubble, no bubble. Come on. No bubbles around here except the one with my 3-year-old daughter blows outside. She loves bubbles. I don't know why kids love bubbles so much. I mean, they're pretty cool. You just sit there and pop them. Now, bubble wrap. No, that's a whole new thing. I love that. That's good. That's good. So what classifies a housing bubble? Because I've asked this question. I don't believe we're in a housing bubble, but I want to see the numbers that prove a housing bubble. Is it something you just believe in? Is it just like a fantasy? Like, what is this? Well, where are we going to get a better source than Better Dwelling to talk about this idea of a bubble? So they share interesting stats. I'm going to just say they're interesting. Okay. And here's what they have to say. Canadian real estate buyers pay steep premiums to own versus rent. Canadian real estate buyers pay steep premiums to own compared to their global peers. IMF research shows Canada's house price to rent ratio, the difference between renting and buying, is one of the highest in the world. Interesting. The house price to rent ratio is the annual cost to carry a house compared to rent in the region. So you get the difference. You get the idea. Well, what does it cost versus what does it cost to rent? Ownership costs include some other fees like property taxes, but they also leave out some costs like maintenance. The ratio does not tell us about affordability, because this is often the argument people say why we're in a bubble is affordability. Well, maybe we were looking in the wrong spot. What it does, though, is it strictly compares ownership versus renting. This is what this ratio does. And they say there's a few reasons why you want to look at these numbers, but the biggest is relative consumer value. Okay, so this idea of value or overvalued. The ratio is often used by economists to determine whether a market is fair, undervalued, or instead of saying overvalued, say, or in a bubble, or are we in a bubble? So their conclusion here is that if we have a higher number, it costs more to live beyond what it costs to rent, it is simply unaffordable, it's overvalued, it's in a bubble. That's what they're saying. Very interesting point. Very interesting point. The most notable use of these ratios was during the U.S. housing crisis, during which researchers flagged the ratio's performance in 2004 when it passed 115%, talking about the States. 4 years later, the U.S. was declared a bubble as it collapsed and people flowed away from ownership. Now let's look at where Canada is in the context of the rest of the world. Do you believe this story? If you do, then maybe you think we're in a bubble. Canada's house price to rent ratio is the highest in the G7. Canada currently has one of the highest house price to rent ratios in the world. The ratio was 122.43% in 2019, meaning it costs you 22.43% more to buy than rent. Overall, it's the 8th highest in the world. Now, can I be a devil's advocate a little bit and say, well, does that just mean maybe people are willing to plant their flag here more? Do they maybe want to own more? Is there an incentive for us to own more? I don't know. I'm reading what they're saying. They're putting it in the perspective of a bubble, but thank you for the stats because I haven't had any other legitimate argument for it. This is probably the first one I'm seeing that we can actually put together in numbers. This is likely why Canada has so many negative cap landlords currently in the market. That's true. Maybe that's why you can't get a positive cash flow in that condo, even if prices do come down 10%. Canada's ratio is higher than 80% of economies tracked. That's an important stat. The US sits, by the way, at number 25 at 108.99. This year is only half over, but Canada's numbers are likely to change and not in the direction one might expect. And I like that they are able to round this out for us. Think about rents, guys. What's happening with rents right now? They're coming down. They're currently falling in cities like Toronto and Vancouver. Meanwhile, what's happening with prices? House prices have managed to stay at a similar level or in many cases even rise. They've risen. He has risen. The costs have risen. Right? So what happens here? Because we've got rental rates are so high that governments are even saying we need to get involved. The rent rates, yet those are coming down. Yet prices are so much higher than the rent. So we're challenged on both sides. Maybe, here's an idea. Maybe we just sell everything and we live in our cars. Then you just remember, oh, damn it. I just sold my Honda to cover rent that the tenant didn't pay me. I guess you could say I'm out of my element now. Oh, silly, Bradley. Silly. The dad jokes are real. So we're gonna transition in a second, but a couple of highlights that I wanted to share with you that I saw. Redfin's CEO, this came out of the States, geekwire.com. They were interviewing this guy, and he says it feels almost eerie talking about the market, even in the States, guys, it's not just here in Toronto. We're running naked through the jungle with a Bowie knife clenched between our teeth, which is the way Redfin was born to be. Speaking of being in your element, that's the element of Redfin. And they say, against the backdrop of double-digit unemployment, a second surge of COVID, and widespread protests, the strength of the housing market almost feels eerie. Does that not sound like here? But they say he is, quote, a self-described nervous Nelly, and he's mindful that, quote, the bottom of the economy could fall out a second time. But for now, all signs point to near-term growth for Redfin. We need to be careful, even in the States. We need to be paying attention as we enter into the fall. There's a lot of question marks, a lot more question marks, in my opinion, than when COVID first began. But they asked the parliamentary budget officer here in Canada in an article called Canada's Deficit, quote, manageable without tax increase if COVID measures temporary. This is a PBO publication. He says this, my sense is that it's possible to deal with the deep deficit that the government will be incurring in the current fiscal year, but as long as it's for 1 year. I thought we were going for like months, not year. I don't think year was in the cards, but apparently that's considered short term. So it's affordable without necessarily having to increase taxes if all the programs have been set up and all the big exceptional expenditures are indeed temporary. And then they asked the same guy, he says that he sees a big deficit. It would be much more problematic. So if we go beyond a year, and we would probably need to do something as a country to restore something that's more fiscally sustainable over the long term, which means cutting expenditures or raising tax, or a combination of both. I love how raising tax is your solution. You raise tax and you scare people away. You reduce business. You reduce productivity. You incentivize programs like CERB. You push people downwards, right? I don't understand that, but anyways, that's another problem for another day. But when they asked Morneau, I believe this is a Morneau quote, or it might be the same guy. Oh no, Bill Morneau, here we go. Usually budgets have a 5-year horizon, and right now the government's horizon ends in March 2021, so we don't know. Actually, this was talking about Bill Morneau, the finance minister. So we really don't have any idea of what's going to come, and I'll be interested in March 2021 to see what they do, because hopefully they can stretch out and give us a 5-year horizon. But really, if you were in a position like Morneau, you'd be trying to keep your mouth shut as much as possible. Try and keep your head down. Oh, I could come up with a wee joke, but I don't have time for that. Let's move on. So this idea of emergency orders, I really could have put this article at the beginning. I know. I like to put the best stuff at the beginning, but sometimes there's just so much juicy that there's room for the whole podcast, and I have to slap it down at the bottom. For any of you who have been following us and you listen from front to end, from back to front to rear to the behind, you guys know that I called a 50-50 shot that we would see as of August 1st rent evictions, which was a bit of a Hail Mary, I would admit. But you know what? I was bang on, 50% right. I could have just been like, I could have done a 25 thing and really hedged my bets. But I did see emergency orders shortening. They were stretching them at a shorter capacity. And I was thinking, you know what? This seems to be lining up that if they don't extend this by the end, and they seem to line it up before August began, and I was like, I think so. Well, we were right. There is, in fact, an ability to evict with all the craziness. Bill 184 going on, which is law right now, and yet the city want to fight that. Maybe it's too little, too late, because according to the NDP, which I love how it's the NDP have to come out, and they announce it on August 1st. You guys know a few days ago, I'm like, what happened to the emergency orders? Like, why are we not discussing this? This is days before August 1st, okay? And I'm like, the emergency orders ended yesterday. Nobody announced the emergency orders ended. It's like we announced that they're stretching, but they don't announce when it ended. Like that, should that not be big news too? So we don't announce it. Now maybe this was all part of the plan to be a little bit more discreet and to line things up. I wish there were more people talking about this stuff like I am, guys. I really do. Where am I going to get my news? Apparently, I have to decipher and translate it for you guys, and I'm glad I did, because I didn't hear anyone else talking about this as a possibility. As rent checks have come, some are warning that Ontarians, that actually sounds better. We should just be Ontarios. We should prepare for a wave of evictions now that protections put in place earlier in COVID-19 pandemic have been lifted. Is that not big news? Like you can get evicted now. The opposition, New Democrats, say that because the provincial state of emergency has ended, evictions can start back up again Saturday, aka 2 days ago. Happy Civic Holiday to you, tenants. A spokesperson for the Premier says the bill reinforces to landlords and necessity of exploring repayment agreements and maintaining tenancies rather than resorting to evictions. There's this big fight on Bill 184. I don't care. I don't care if you think it's good or bad. Regardless, let's get these tenants out, whatever the process is. If we can't afford to bog down the LTB, well, then let them come to their own agreements. And that's what the plan says. Whether you agree with it or not, the point is right now, eviction orders are going out, and they're mostly happening in areas where they were pre-pandemic. The ones that were pending before the pandemic began are setting up again and restarting. I think many people, because of the radio silence, have got caught flat-footed. And my expectation is by September 1st, you're going to have a whack of people that are learning their rights as landlords and saying, hey, time to pay up, my friend. I have seen how this process is opening up, but I expect you're going to hear more over the next week or so. Of course, this happened over the weekend. We should have known last week, which you guys, as you listened, did know last week, but we should have all known last week. But of course, everyone's now caught. They're all taking their little holidays and they're taking their break. But when this week starts up again, I think it's going to be a little bit more commonplace to have a conversation. And realistically, guys, we got to be saying our prayers because only God can save us from the wave that's coming. Let's just hope Jesus is here to catch us, and not zipping away in his secret new Honda. For as John 12:49 reads, for I do not speak of my own accord. I'm going to leave it there. I hope you guys had a wonderful time, learned some stuff as it relates to the Toronto real estate market. Give us a thumbs up, give us a like. I guess that's the same thing. Subscribe if you haven't already. Tell your friends. We're going to be here every day as much as possible, as long as the news permits, talking about everything going on in our local market. We are number one on iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts for Toronto real estate. I'll see you next time. Take care and keep it real.